animators and artists. Are you curious about the craft of animation? For this live stream panel, we invited 3 animation professionals featured in the Toon Boom Ambassador Program to discuss their work. Today's topics cover the role that rough animation plays in a production pipeline, misconceptions about rough animation, as well as advice for roughing more effectively. So welcome to the live stream, Alex, Bonnie, and Brooke.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
And I just wanted to add that this is a live discussion. So if you're watching this live and have questions about rough animation, feel free to type them into the chat and I just might ask them on the air. So let's get this started. Let's start with introductions. Brooke, could you introduce yourself and describe your current role in animation?
Yeah, certainly. Hi, everyone. I'm Brooke Burnett. I'm currently a 2D rough animator and a character and prop designer at SpindleHorse Toons. On top of that, I'm just a 2D generalist for multiple random small freelance positions. But yeah, I love what I do, and I'm really excited to be here. So thank you.
Hey, we're excited to have you here. And I also wanted to add that I'm a big fan of everything that SpindleHorse is producing right now. I think that it has been a really positive frontrunner for independent animation, and it's really cool.
Thanks. It rules to be on such a cool team with really awesome people. I like every day, whenever I see something new or a new scene that somebody has finished, it blows me out of the water that I get to be a part of something with so many talented people. So yeah, thank you.
That's awesome. Bonnie, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself and your current role in animation?
Absolutely. Hi, guys. I'm Bonnie Mier. I am from the Netherlands, but I'm currently residing and working in Ireland. I've been in this industry for about 7 years now, where I've fulfilled different positions in different studios. I've worked in Amsterdam, in Denmark, and now in Ireland. I've recently wrapped up a production for Cartoon Saloon, where I was a posing artist or a character layout artist, which is a hand-drawn pass for a rigged TV show. And I'm now a rigged animator in Lighthouse, and I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much amazing talent in Ireland and Kilkenny in particular with Cartoon Saloon and Lighthouse. So we're really excited to have you on this panel. And Alex, could you introduce yourself and describe your current role in animation?
Hi, yeah, I'm Alex Smeaton. I'm an animator from the UK, but currently living and working in Vancouver, Canada. I work for the studio Titmouse on the newest season of Star Trek Lower Decks. And yeah, I've been in the industry for about 6 years in predominantly rigged animation. Little bits of hand-drawn animation here and there, but generally rigged animation, mixture of the two. But yeah, I've worked at a variety of studios, like with Bonnie and Cartoon Saloon and Lighthouse and Blink Inc. in London. And yeah, that's me up to date. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. And since you've worked both in Canada and the UK, what has your experience been like moving between different countries, different animation industries?
It's been good. I've got to say, Canada is quite different to working in Europe, because I worked in Germany a little bit before as well. That was my first studio gig, and probably my first introduction to rough animation on The Amazing World of Gumball. I was doing cleanup and in-betweening on that. But yeah, they all work quite differently here. I don't know. And it's funny because you can come halfway across the world and still be working with people that you were working back home. Like one of my friends here she's from the UK as well, and I worked with her previously before. So yeah, it's interesting. But no, there's not, in terms of animation wise, it's all very similar. Same sort of quotas, same thing.
Hey, it's a small world.
Yeah.
So why don't we start by defining some terms? We're here today to talk about rough animation. So what are roughs, and why are roughs an important part of an animator's process? And since we ended with you, Alex, I'm going to start with you.
I would say, yeah, the roughs are an important part of the process. I mean, for me in rigged animation, it's very important, especially with action heavy shots. When you open up the scene and you are given sort of director's notes and you need to get a feel of how the scene's going to play out, you need to get things down quickly and to sort of test things out, see what works, see what doesn't. I definitely think that in Star Trek in particular, it's a very action heavy show. I've had to use it probably the most in my career so far, having to use roughs. But yeah, just to get a feel. And also for me, occasionally I will have the director say, could you do a rough pass of this first? So that we can see how it works, because with the rig, you can spend a long time doing posing something with the rigs, only for the lead or the director to come back and say, this looks flat, this doesn't look very dynamic, this could be pushed further. And I have had to go back, and when you draw it, it's how you picture it rather than actually seeing what the rig is like and seeing what you can do. Oh, maybe I could do this with the rig, but I feel like with rough, you can dive in a little deeper and actually, saves time in the long run as well.
Yeah, with rigged animation, I think there's often a debate between people who like animating by thinking with the rig or by roughing out in a more traditional way first before even touching the rig. So do you feel there's benefit to doing those sorts of roughs?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And like I say, with Star Trek, I've noticed that more so than ever. But yeah, it can sort of depend on the complexity of the rig. Like I've worked on certain shows where it's so complex that sometimes roughing it, there wouldn't be a need to, because it's like when the turnaround is so like intricate on a 2D, like almost 3D. That's more for talking headshots. If it's an action shot, I still think you should be roughing it out, regardless of how advanced the rig is. So yeah.
All right, and Brooke, from your point of view, what is rough animation, and why are roughs an important part of an animator's process?
Rough animation, in my opinion, or I guess in my experience, because I know it varies depending on the individual's role or how it suits their current profession. Because it does vary if you're working on a personal project versus maybe a piece of animation that requires rigs. But for me, it's rough animation begins with the key poses, which are the main like poses or exaggerated elements or pinpoints within the scene that are sort of the very big moments that help sort of ground it and are kind of guided by the storyboards. And then you fill in with the final in-betweens or the pieces of the drawings that sort of bring the key poses from one to the other and create that fluid movement. And that's exactly about how we work on SpindleHorse Toons, working with the key pose and then moving to the in-between with rough animation. And I know other people, and also personally, whenever I'm working on a personal project that doesn't require a lot of heavy detail, I like to just go straight ahead and just do all the drawings at once, not really thinking about the key poses, but rather just sort of going with the flow, drawing after drawing, and then timing out how exactly I want like one drawing to be held. But it's the process varies depending on the individual, just to sort of reiterate, but it is sort of like a thoughtful process either way, depending on what approach you're taking. You do have to consider like how this pose is going to play out and how the movement from one pose to the other is going to look. If you want to maybe overshoot a drawing and make it look more exaggerated, or if you want it to be more subtle, it is all taken into account within the process of roughing something out, no matter how detailed it is.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're saying that like roughing is almost like thinking on paper.
Yes, I would say so. Yeah, it translates exactly, at least in my experience, from paper to digital. Like it's a very thoughtful process, no matter the medium used to employ it.
And Bonnie, from your point of view and experience, what is rough animation and why are RUVs an important part of an animator's process?
So I see it as a hand-drawn pass in which I really try to get a feeling for the rhythm, the spacing, the timing, the volumes of my characters within the scene. I work for, since I work with rigs as well, it's can be really rough. I see it as a thumbnail process, almost like you do for an illustration. You don't want to go straight into detail. You really can't be too precious with it. So you go really fast, really rough. You just try to get your idea across. Really, it's not an essential for rigged animation, but it can really elevate your scene, and it's a very handy process. And while it takes a bit of extra time, it will, as Alex mentioned before, it will save you some time in the long run because you know your scene works. You don't want to go straight into detailed character rig, not knowing if your pose actually tells the story correctly. So I definitely use it mostly for action scenes, scenes where a character interacts with a layout or interacts with another character. That's most of that.
And my next question, so Bonnie, what is the biggest misconception that you've encountered about rough animation?
So we all see and know these beautiful pencil tests done by Disney animators usually. And while they're fantastic, they're incredibly expensive and time consuming. I mean, they're great for hand-drawn feature films. They're great to figure out the movement of a certain character. But in productions, we don't really have to go that detailed. That's usually not the case. In rigged animation, you can usually get away with just bouncing balls and bendy sticks. For hand-drawn projects, you might want to just stick to key poses and breakdowns. If you have clear timing charts, the cleanup artist or assistant animators can take it from there. We just don't have time to make the most beautiful things. It is great for your personal work if you want to spice up your portfolio or want to make something really cool to put on Twitter or Instagram, then sure, that you can put your time in that. But in a general production, it's usually not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually a really good point. Like in the context of a production, you want to make your mistakes quickly and have those changes made really early on in the process, because later on, when you're doing really detailed work is done, when like line work and paint and ink and paint is added to the scene, it's a lot more costly, both in terms of time and in terms of budget, to change things at that point.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's a kill your darlings process. It's really nice to be able to go to your supervisor and it's like, is this take working, or do you want me to completely change it up? And you might have spent half an hour on it, and that's what you need. There's no time to go too deep into it. Really.
Alex, what is the biggest misconception that you've encountered about rough animation?
Yeah, I was thinking as Bonnie was talking, I haven't encountered too many or had too many discussions with people about misconceptions, but there's things that you sort of learn along the way from what other people do or don't do. And I have heard that some people think it might take too long to rough out a whole scene, and in TV animation then everything needs to be go go go, and they wonder if it's a bit of a waste of time. I mean, everybody works differently. Some people do more detailed drawings, some people don't, and as long as you are hitting your quota or you're getting the scenes done by the end of the week or the end of the month or whatever, then it should be all good. But in terms of hearing about misconceptions, there's not too many.
Yeah, well, I even think like in terms of someone saying I don't have time to do roughs for a scene, I'd almost argue maybe you don't have time not to.
Yeah. And I do think it's, yeah, because in at the end of the day, once the thing that you've submitted and you've done really beautiful, nice, clean roughs, and the director says, well, sorry, not clean roughs, but clean animation, say if it was with a rig, and then they say, well, no, this isn't, you need to go back and take some more time with the roughs and things like that. And actually, yeah, it would waste time. But yeah, I get the thought of, you open a scene, the rigs are there, you just want to get on with it, but you need to take a step back sometimes.
I think that's a really good point. Brooke, from your experience, what is the biggest misconception that you've encountered about rough animation?
I feel like probably coming from maybe people who know very little about animation, or like maybe a friend who doesn't know anything about the world or the workings of animation. And I feel like this is probably a consistent theme, like with any profession that you might not know about. You might not know the inner workings of it, but I think it comes as a shock when people are like, "Oh, you have to make all of those drawings. You have to do all of those like frames for it to actually act out." Because for rigged animation, it is streamlined in a sense, but in essence, it is a drawing of a character. It is something that somebody had to draw and, use their cognitive and like manual skill to create. I feel like that's a much broader term for animation in general, is that it requires a lot more drawing than people think, because all that they see is this wonderful, beautiful, finished drawing or finished animation in front of them that's been fully composed and composited. It takes multiple moving parts, but the rough animation does require a lot of drawing and thought as well. That's probably the biggest misconception that I've seen, is that people don't understand the amount of layers and the amount of thought that even like this tiny, I guess comparatively, it really depends on the production, like how much like work needs to be put into it. Even if you are just using it to sort of guide the scene for a rigged animation, it does require like thought and effort. It's not something that is entirely streamlined as some people think.
Brooke, how do you approach drawing rough animation in your work, and what details do you tend to include, and what do you leave out?
For SpindleHorse specifically, the roughs need to be very tight, because we very rarely use rigs at all, unless it's for like a small reusable asset, like somebody's wings that are like consistently flapping and we attach that to a character, or like an object that's very complex that we would need multiple views of. We very, very rarely reuse certain things. So it's mostly traditional animation. So it's sorry, could you repeat the question? I'm like getting away from myself right now.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a complete answer, but we're looking for like, what details do you tend to include in rough
Okay.
animation? What do you leave out?
Awesome.
And maybe some thoughts about like how you approach the process.
Yeah. So I guess like in my professional work, it's very detail heavy. Like you need to be consistent with where certain lines are on a character. Features need to stay consistent, because you are drawing the character from scratch, if not maybe tracing a model sheet to get a certain pose correctly, or like slightly altering the pose. So the roughs need to be very tight, but sometimes I will do like a first pass or a second pass for the key pose, and then a first or second pass with roughs. But I'll try and work diligently, so I'm not, using up too much of my time, because time is money. At least for work it is. But for personal projects, I tend to go a lot rougher, and then I add the details on later within the clean pass, because there's no need, unless it's a project with a friend, there's no need to sort of have to translate the smaller elements that I would otherwise know about. Like I might just use like a weird cup shape for the hand, and I'll be like, I'll do the fingers later. or I might, you know, just do, like Bonnie said, like a stick for the, or a ball for the face and sticks for the body. And I'll be like, I'll do the rest later in clean. So it really does vary depending on whether it's for a specific project that has certain strict guidelines, or for a personal thing that, you know, you can sort of toss it up and figure out how you want to go along the way. It really does vary, but I think that's probably the best part about it, is that you can, it's up to you.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Bonnie, how do you approach drawing rough animation in your work, and what details do you tend to include, and what do you leave out?
Sorry, was that for me?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I think you cut out briefly while I was
think my
asking the
internet
question,
might be
but
lagging.
not a problem. Are you able to hear me right now?
Yes, I am. Can you
Okay,
understand
good.
me?
I can understand you. So,
Okay.
Bonnie, how do you approach
Cool.
drawing rough animation in your work, and what details do you tend to include, and what do you leave out?
Brilliant. Well, as I mentioned before, I usually use a bouncing ball and bendy sticks for limbs. I try to get my storytelling poses or the keys out, and I give it a bit more volume that actually fits the character, but I tend to stick to just doing the keys, the breakdowns, maybe an anticipation or an overshoot, but I don't go with in-betweens. And my breakdowns can very often be just the ball for the skull, and I'm trying to trace the arcs. I might often leave out the arms. I use sticks for the legs to make sure the foot placement is correct in the layout. But every detail, like overshoots and follow through animation, I always leave that for the rig. So that's basically how I approach it. It's if I take a day for a scene from post to key to full animation, I'd say I'd spend an hour max on my rough. I mean, depends on the complexity, but in general, that tends to be my process for it.
And by focusing on like the circle for the head, the stick for the sort of body, you're very much focusing on like that volume and the movement that it's doing in a scene.
Yes, absolutely. I tend to pick and choose my scenes, like, or at least I tend to only do those passes for action scenes, like Alex mentioned. If it's just a character talking, I might leave it out. I might have enough information in the rig, but it's usually just getting it out there, figuring out if it works.
Alex, how do you approach drawing rough animation in your work, and what details do you tend to include? What do you leave out?
Yeah, mine tend to be very rough. But no, I generally, my process will be starting with, I'll have either the character model sheet of the character that I'm meant to be roughing out, either on a separate screen, or I'll have the rig in the scene just to one side, just so that I can see it. I'm not trying to draw the character in my roughs particularly, but it's just nice to see. So like with characters that have got ponytails or the specific attributes that might need to be focused on a little bit more. But generally I would be very rough. We're like listening to these guys, like I don't really do like ball and stick type things. Like for some reason, I don't know why I do it, but I tend to, it's almost a little bit like life drawing. Like I am trying to get the volley, like get a lot of it in there, but still it's very sketchy, still very rough. And I'm thinking of a specific scene in particular of just trying to rough out a run cycle from like 3/4 above, like I don't know, almost like bird's eye kind of thing. And you have to try and think about perspectives and having the character there and thinking how it would move. But no, generally that's how it works. And I would, be using like bright colors just so that I can see it. So then when I do bring the rig in, I can see my roughs clearly. And also if that's an issue, I can put a white wash behind it so that I can see it even clearer. But generally speaking, that's how I approach it. And then the other thing which I have noticed on other shows, and I have done myself, is keeping the head, like usually within the scenes, like the head, either drawings or the head of the rig, and then just because there could be a scene where it's a lot of movement but the head's not really changing a lot, so you just keep it in there but you're just drawing the roughs of the body. I saw that a lot on Gumball, actually. That was predominantly what happened. People rarely ever roughed out the head for that, unless it was specific extreme like expressions and things like that. And also for lip sync, some people we would rough out the mouth shapes if they're really like stretching their mouth or doing something crazy with their mouth or their eyes, like roughing those out in there. But no, that's generally my approach, and I only ever do the keys. I don't really do too, unless again action shots, like you might need to put some breakdowns in just to really make it obvious what you're thinking for the director or for the supervisor. And then as well, an extra element I'll add in if there is added bits that might need keying, some like cloth or something like that, doing that in a different color so that you can clearly see it. And also if their arms are doing something crazy compared to what the rest of their body is doing those in a different color, things like that.
Alex, are there any tools that you tend to use when you're drawing rough animation, like things that help with the workflow or you find useful?
Yeah, I mean, some people, if I'm really struggling with the scene, I will do little thumbnails or do small drawings, and I don't know what, I can't really say why drawing it on paper, just small to one side, just for some reason it works. There's probably something behind that, but I don't really know why, but it does help just to come away from the computer, I think, coming away from the scene and just thinking about it, maybe. But no, I'll video myself. There's a lot of stupid videos that I still have of videoing myself doing action, like just, a lot of, usually more acting stuff for things like that, more nuanced, like subtle emotions and things like that. Or just, I don't want to call your sort of team that you work with tools, but they're like asking other people and getting other people to have a look, and not just being like just doing it yourself and not letting anyone else see, and asking for help and getting a second opinion and sort of stuff.
I mean, I think that's a great resource, like asking your colleagues. I also always enjoy seeing the filmed reference material for any scenes. Those are incredible. I think that we need to see more of them, to be honest.
No.
People eating French fries. It's amazing. Brooke, what kind of tools do you use or find helpful when working on rough animation? They could be resources like colleagues, or they could be things like specific types of brushes or onion skinning.
Yeah, to sort of echo what Alex said, I love and adore just taking videos, or like I strongly suggest that people do this because it is a great help, and I think it really benefited me early on, just like having to see and like look at myself do a certain motion in the mirror or record it. It really aided that sort of connection of like making the character do it and maybe exaggerating it a bit further, or characterizing it in a certain different way while still keeping account into like joint movements and expression and stuff like that. So that is a great assistance to like sort of beginning your rough animation journey, or even if you're far along, because it's still like it's incredibly helpful. And even just like standing up physically, not even recording it, but like moving your arm or like moving your leg and just like thinking about how it would work and sort of translating that onto the page is something that I do. And I probably look like a crazy person if anybody looked in my window and I was just like, moving my joints along as I just blankly stare at my wall. But it is a great help. And I remember like just having friends over early on in college so that we could record like odd movements. My one friend like sort of did this mime of a like surfing on our bed so we could try and like get a weird like motion within their knees because we couldn't get it right. And we're like, okay, we need to see how people surf. And we've just researched so many like live stock videos and footage. But apart from that, like I fully agree with like footage and reference videos and just moving yourself. Like those are great aids. Tools that I frequently use for rough animation would be like the onion skin, either within Toon Boom or traditionally like on paper, like just flipping back and forth, like seeing like the before pose and the after pose or like the frames and how they differ and sort of help you fill in the gaps of a rough. I also like to change the opacity of maybe like if I'm working within like a vector on the pencil tool and I have a color, I like to change the opacity of that color and then like maybe do another pass on top of it on a different layer in a different color so I can sort of like toggle and see the different like opacities. And you can use the light box too, but I personally just like to change the color and opacity. I don't know, it feels more whimsical for an odd reason. But yeah, and also I know timing charts. A lot of people use timing charts. I use them very rarely, like when I'm really struggling and I need to think like, I don't want to say numerically, but in a sort of, I don't know what the proper term would be, maybe mathematically or like in a weird structured architectural sense. Putting it into words is difficult, but if I really need to like think about how the timing of a scene should play out and experimentation just hasn't helped, I'll use a timing chart and sort of restart and take the rough in a different approach. And after that, it normally goes according to plan. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but many things you can do, many tools.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. So when you're working with video reference, because I feel like this was a question that comes up sometimes, what are you doing so that like you're not just rotoscoping? Like, what are you looking for to exaggerate?
I mostly look for poses that I think I can bring to another level. I know some people, when they take video reference, they themselves exaggerate and that helps them. I personally just record myself doing a motion as I normally would in real life. And then I kind of latch onto poses that I think like, oh, I could push that further. And then I'll take that pose, translate it to a drawing where I maybe amplify some of the features and I use those poses as my keys. And then I fill in between. And from there, it sort of kind of creates itself. Like it's like an odd translation process, but that's personally how I do it. I know other people have different approaches, but that is how I sort of keep it from looking like a rotoscope.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Bonnie, what tools do you use for rough animation, or what are some things that you find that are helpful when in that approach?
Yeah, I also love filming myself or others. That's always been really fun and helpful. It's great to step away from your desk for a second. I also have a little mirror on my desk for expressions or seeing a hand from a different angle and that kind of stuff. In Toon Boom, I usually just use the basic brush tool because I don't want to get too precious with my roughs. So it's less painful to throw a drawing away. Sometimes when I'm stuck, I really like to just send off my shot to the supervisor and just have a second pair of eyes on it. Sometimes you really just need to, you just don't see the problem anymore. Someone else can easily point out like, yeah, that's not working. And on a second viewing, you'll be like, yeah, that's very helpful. Another thing I'd really like to do if I'm stuck or I'm waiting for a scene is just to scroll down shot grid or any production program we have and see the scenes coming in and look at the work that your peers are doing and be inspired by it, go through it frame by frame and see like how they did it or tackled it. That's usually really helpful for me, especially if I get to work with a new character that I've not used before. And it makes it fun as well to be like, oh yeah, I'm working on this cool thing, because it's very easy to get tunnel visioned and be alone. But it's a very collaborative project, usually animation. So it's yeah, definitely make use of your peers. Yeah.
We got a question from the audience. Bonnie, do you have any recommendations for like exercises for practicing rough animation?
Exercises, as in your posture or getting better at rough animation in general?
I think it's probably more like a drawing exercise, right? Like if someone's like,
yeah,
like, what's something someone could draw if they really want to practice their rough animation muscles?
Sure. Well, I started with bouncing balls, really, getting timing and spacing right, flower bags, walk cycles, all the very basic stuff. It's quite mundane, but you kind of need to learn the basics before you can break it and before you can play with it and make it your own. It's also great to look at your favorite animation films and go through it frame by frame, see what's happening really.
So you'd almost recommend like breaking open the copy of like Preston Blair's animation book.
A little bit, yeah. Or the Animator Survival Kit or something. Yeah. It's a bit conservative in its ways, but it's still the fundamentals. The animation principles are still there. It's still relevant, but definitely also totally break them. But just know what you're breaking before you. Yeah, start with bouncing balls. They're great, very helpful.
Alex, do you have any recommendations for exercises that artists can do if they're practicing rough animations outside of a studio?
I would say life drawing, or if not life drawing, if you can't get on a like class for life drawing, then just going to coffee shops or bars or whatever and taking a little sketchbook. I mean, it can, like some people you can feel a little bit like shy about doing that, but I mean, as long as you're not staring at someone for for like 10 minutes whilst you draw them, just doing like like quick 15 seconds, just as people are walking by and just people watching, but also sketching at the same time. Because I mean, this obviously only really, that doesn't always apply to character animation, like human animation. I mean, obviously you can utilize that for creature animation as well, but generally speaking, as long as if you can quickly draw someone's form and when you look at it, you can see, yeah, that's what that person was doing, then that's, so like it goes somewhere in your memory, where then like when you are doing roughs, you can sort of, because you're also with life drawing, you're inspecting. I mean, this is a little bit animation like 101 sort of thing, but like, yeah, like you are looking at something for a prolonged period of time, and it's not an angle you would have normally drawn something at. And so, yeah, those I think that would be a good practice.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that you've sort of hit the nail on the head too is that like if you're practicing, you're doing the exact same thing over and over again, you're probably not going to make a lot of progress. But if you're drawing people that you encounter in real life, you've got a lot of variation to work with.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone's different as well, and yeah, everyone moves slightly differently, and yeah, so I think you're not going to be animating like people walking around, like, but yeah, if you can just get those poses onto paper, I think that's good. And also, yeah, you actually, I think I remember watching this before when talking about backgrounds, like getting the feel of drawing a background by going to somewhere that looks like the background you want to draw, and because you're drawing it, you're obviously focusing on such the minute details that, yeah, it all makes a full circle.
So Alex, as you're like drawing people on the bus, has anyone ever turned to you and asked you what you're doing?
No, I don't know if I have ever drawn anyone on the bus. It's been a while since I've actually taken like transit. But I think I would normally, if I was to do it, it would be more, I do go and would do it in coffee shops and things like that more so. But no one's, I wouldn't try to not make it look too obvious. But even then it can be a bit tricky with sort of side eye, like looking at someone, but not wanting to look like you're looking at someone is a tricky get. That's another practice. That's something else you can try to practice.
Learn social skills.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Learn how to be shifty.
No follow-up questions. Brooke, do you have any recommendations for exercises on practicing rough animation outside of a studio?
I think I would just have to say what Bonnie and Alex have already said. Like it's very helpful to know the foundationals of animation, because even if you're working on something very complex, it does boil down to knowing the fundamentals of like how weight works, the wave principle, arcs within animation, bouncing ball. You can sort of break apart a very complex scene into those things, and it helps to know them. So like if once you have those foundations down, you can sort of implement them into maybe things that are a little more complex, like a character picking up a heavy object, how the joints work, how their form is supposed to stay consistent through practice of life drawing, and understanding like how weight moves through the body when you pick something up. Also, this is probably more of a resource than an exercise, but I mean, it is a form of like exercise if you choose to employ it. But there's this wonderful Twitter page that I have only a few times like participated in, but I think it's called 1 Hour Animation, where a bunch of people, there's a weekly prompt, and it can be like a vague like verb, noun, just a word, like magic or run or scared, something random. And you use that prompt as like inspiration to create a quick animation, and you only have an hour to make the animation. So it kind of challenges you to think critically of like what drawings you want to spend the most time on, and how quickly you go about doing a rough. So it's a very good resource to sort of exercise that skill set of creating something quickly, but also efficiently in a way that's completely original to your interpretation of a word or whatever that word sparks imagination. So that's a bit more of a very specific resource that I think is good for exercises. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that one's done. Is that the one that's done by Michael Doig and India Swift?
I
Or am I
believe
thinking of a
so.
different?
I
Okay.
believe I'm not entirely sure. I just know whenever it pops up on my feed, it's just such a treat because you see so many different like retweets of people who have taken this word and done something completely different than the last person with it, and I'm just like, oh, that's so fun. And they only had an hour to do it. So
That's so
it's
cool.
good inspiration, yeah.
Brooke, do you have any other recommendations for resources that you recommend to animators who want to draw rough animation effectively?
I think, I mean, I will, sorry, I'm trying to find the words. I think with any form of art, like the internet is the best resource because it's everything that you could ever want at your fingertips. If there's something very specific that you're looking for, you can probably find it for free or for a very low cost. If not even like a free trial for something like Toon Boom. But there's so many YouTube tutorials that I have employed to help me learn animation a little better, specifically like effects animation. There's a wonderful artist that I often turn to. I think their handle is called Stylus Rumble, and they have so many great tutorials on learning roughs specifically for effects on top of other related items like learning to rig and rigged animation. But I would just say like use the internet to your advantage, and also some other specific resources. I know Aaron Blaze Art, a past Disney animator, has some like incredible, very affordable resources for life drawing, animal drawing, which are very helpful in creating rough animation. And I believe there's like YouTube tutorials by another Disney artist by the name of Mario Menjivar. I think it's like a $2 subscription. I'm not entirely sure which platform, but he, similar to Aaron Blaze, talks about fundamentals and implementing the fundamentals into like more advanced animation with roughs. So I would recommend those. And also just like if you find an artist that really compels you, study them and try and like break apart their scenes. Like learn what things intrigue you and then use that to your advantage to further your interest of learning. So it makes the process a lot easier when you're really engaged and you find something that you can latch onto.
And since you mentioned like using YouTube as a resource, one thing I just want to quickly mention is that if you're on YouTube and you press the period and comma buttons, the sort of triangle brackets, you can step forward and backwards one frame, and that is incredibly helpful.
I didn't know that. That's so cool.
We're learning.
Bonnie, are there any resources that you recommend for animators who want to draw rough animation effectively?
Sure, yeah. So as Brooke said as well, we live in an era where everything is on the internet, which is fantastic. I can highly recommend joining an animation Discord server, like the one from Toon Boom. It's just getting your work out there, getting it seen by peers, getting feedback is super helpful. Getting inspired by people is great. Making friends is fantastic. There is a guy on YouTube, Tonico Pantoja, who's really great, who has fantastic YouTube tutorials. I do think he also has a few things that are more elaborate on his Patreon. I'm not sure, but he has fantastic fundamental videos that even get referenced in our studio. So that's lovely. But definitely seek out a community because it's a small world. Making friends, you might meet them years later down the path in your career. And yeah, just getting your work out there, getting people to look at it is super helpful. Yeah, something like that.
So Bonnie, since you mentioned that we have a Discord server, if anyone types in discord.gg/toonboom, that will take you to the server for help with Harmony, Storyboard Pro. People share their animation there all the time. It's a really fun community, and I'm glad to be part of it. Alex, are there any resources that you'd recommend for animators who want to draw rough animation effectively?
I was like, if I was struggling before, I think these guys have said quite a lot of different resources that that I wouldn't have even known of, and that's taught me like I know where to look now as well. But yeah, it's funny. Like since university, I would have had a whole list, but for like now it feels like it's got smaller, and I feel like now the best things like to do would be just to watch as much animation as possible. I mean, as well as animation festivals, going to animation festivals, and actually like what Bonnie said about you never know who you might meet further down the line. But I did, like, there was someone who I met at a festival in Stuttgart in Germany, who I then ended up working at the same company for years later, and they didn't remember. But no, it was it is definitely, I think, festivals. I think there's also animation nights in a lot of places where you can go and watch great animations, like Cardiff. I'm yet to go to one here in Vancouver yet, but yeah, in in Cardiff there's a great animation night, and also in Birmingham, great animation nights there as well, and just meeting people. And I know that this isn't necessarily helping with animation roughs, but it does, just involving yourself in the community in general and getting advice from people and speaking to people who are already in the industry. Even just joining a call like this is a great resource.
Yeah, if I could give some shout outs to some other animation festivals. Lightbox is a really awesome gathering in California. The Ottawa International Animation Festival is really great in Ottawa. There are a lot of really great studios around there too. And Glass Animation, I think in Berkeley, has really interesting screenings every year. There are great animation festivals all over the place, and I think that it's a huge resource. I wanted to quickly lightning round a question from the audience, so just really quick answers for this one. But what is your favorite animated movie or TV show? Starting with Alex.
Primal.
Okay, Brooke.
Oh gosh. Well, the only thing that comes to mind is the most recent show that I've watched that I've been obsessed with, which is Cyberpunk Edge Runners, which is so beautiful.
Awesome. Bonnie.
Oh, okay. So I was obsessed with Secret of Nim as a kid, and I really like Clone High. I'm very excited for the new season.
All right. And a final question for you, Bonnie. Where can our viewers see more of your work across the web?
Oh, I am on Instagram and Twitter. With my handle is just my first and last name, Bonnie Mier, on both those platforms. Jeez.
Alex, where can our viewers see more of your work across the web?
Yeah, I have Instagram as well, Alex James Smeaton, but it's it's a bit of a mix of art and personal stuff. So that's where you'll find me.
All right, and Brooke, where can our viewers see more of your work across the web?
You could just go to my website, artofbrooke.com, and also my Instagram is Brewski, and my Twitter is Brewskeeb, because Brewski was taken. So it's different, it varies.
All right, Alex, Bonnie, Brooke, thank you for joining us this week to discuss your work as well as the craft of rough animation. And I'd like to thank our audience for joining us today. If those of you in the audience enjoyed this conversation about rough animation and are looking to start a new role at a studio, Toon Boom Animation hosts professional instructor-led training sessions on paperless animation as well as cutout animation. You can find more about those courses at toonboom.com/training. Our next sessions start in September. Next week, we'll be interviewing the crew behind Lackadaisy on their production process, and you won't want to miss it. So be sure to tune in next time. Thank you, everyone.